is really important to kind of address that ahead of time before you make that decision to apply to those programs. So support system and addressing whether or not you are okay with not having that nearby, and whether that really is significant, especially those with young kids or families. Having support nearby really could make or break your experience and your outcome in school, because you may not be able to get out of clinical in time to pick up your child from school. And in fact, I wouldn't even bet on it. So again, having support nearby to help you out with stuff like that could really, really help your experience. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Fennell. Welcome back to the show. Today, we are going to reveal some Q&A from CRNA faculty members that was from our recent conference back in July of 2023. I'm so excited to share these gold nuggets with you today. And I want to stress to you guys, too, that, again, this is based on about 4 faculty and their opinions. However, what I have found through my time listening to faculty and hearing their advice is you can kind of take these statements and kind of generalize them, knowing that not all schools are going to have the same opinions, nor should they, because there are unique programs out there. And with the reassurance that you will find the right program for you. But it is really important to know your schools and to know the faculty, because their advice is tailored such that it's going to make sure that you know it's a good fit for you to attend their program. So I'm so excited to share with you this episode today. And again, I'm going to make these more general statements. And if I have notes on what program had mentioned these comments, I will mention it. But for the most part, I plan on just making these general statements, just with some gold nuggets that I took away from my note taking, which if you're watching on YouTube, you can see my notes here. Really, really sloppy. I'm like the sloppiest note taker ever. I always wonder why I can't get a better system down and why I'm so sloppy. Like, I don't know how I can even follow some of the stuff I take notes on, but it's just how I've always rolled. So without further ado, I'm going to be going into this today. One thing too is this may be a part 1 and part 2 episode, because I think if I were to do all of this in one episode, it'd be a couple hours long, or at least an hour. So I plan on probably breaking this up into part 1, part 2. I will be cognizant to try to release this episode back to back if we do that. So that way you don't have to wait several months to hear the next part 2. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome. For those of you who are loyal listeners, welcome back. I'm so excited to have you back today. And for those of you new, welcome to the show. Those of you who have been around, you probably know my situation. I am pre-recording these in a batch kind of way. I will be going to the hospital early September for a couple months to be monitored every single day until we have our mono twins. I encourage you to Google mono twins. They're a unique, very rare occurrence, but that is what we are pregnant with, is identical twin girls, which we are very excited to hopefully welcome to the earth, or the earth. They're already on earth, but outside of my womb in October. Their due date is September, so they will be about 32-week-old babies when they are born. So yeah, all that is exciting. And so I am batching these. So again, I'm going to try my best to sprinkle these episodes in along with the current NARS that are doing episodes for the Academy as well. While I'm taking a little bit of a break, I will be coming back into the swing of things, hopefully early next year in 2024. But in the meantime, some of these episodes that you will see me doing are going to be kind of batched and sprinkled in and pre-recorded. All right. So enough with all of that personal updates. All right, let's get into this question that was asked, which is how to pick your school, or things of that nature, how to pick your CRNA program. I did an entire episode on this just a few episodes back. So definitely, this is, what is it? It's August. So depending on when you're listening to this, it was probably back in July of some time. I did a whole episode on this. So I do encourage you to go back through the episodes to listen to that in more detail if you want this topic in more detail. However, I was really pleasantly pleased to hear some of the answers that the faculty gave for this answer, because it definitely sheds a lot of insight on how to go about picking your program. One of the first things that was mentioned was essentially understanding how your program that you're picking operates, meaning how much do they do online versus how much they do in person. And, I think that's an important concept to understand because, well, I know the last year or 2 years had really changed and shifted the way CRNA programs operated. Many programs were very old school, if you ask me, up until recently, where they did almost everything in person. There was actually very few hybrid even options, or definitely very few virtual options for CRNA school, but that is becoming more and more common post pandemic. A lot of schools have either kept some hybrid options or have fully transitioned remotely. Although I will say the vast majority of schools who started off as no remote have transitioned back into not being remote at all. But you'll see there's definitely some schools who have kept some hybrid options for their students due to the fact that they have found this creates more flexibility and ease for their students going to these programs, especially those who are traveling quite far to attend class and things of that nature. So understanding the format and how your school operates and whether that fits into your lifestyle and what you can accomplish during school. I have shared in the past with kind of what my experience was back when I went to school back in 2012, a long time ago now. Virtual was pretty much unheard of. I don't even know if Zoom was around. It probably was, but maybe not. It might have been like in the very early days. There just wasn't, I think that's back even when like Instagram was new. I feel like I'm dating myself now. But it just virtual is really up and coming as far as how people communicated online. It was really kind of novice compared to what we have today. But I had to drive 2 hours to go to class. And so, again, my experience was that in the beginning, I had class 4 times a week. That meant I was traveling 4 times a week, 2 hours one way. So 4 hours in one day on the road just to attend CRNA class, which was, again, 8 hours. So if you time, that's essentially 8 plus 4. So that's, again, a 12-hour day that I was doing 4 times a week on top of studying and mixing in clinical and things of that nature. So it was a very, very big task. I actually did stay with my parents during that time, so I could stay the night versus driving home sometimes. Some of my classmates had to get long stay hotel passes so they could stay at hotels versus driving back and forth. So that was kind of how we dealt with it. But again, a lot of schools are recognizing that this is not necessarily the best option, and there are ways to do things virtually. So a lot of schools have adapted those types of opportunities for you, which is great. It saves you gas, it saves you time, it saves you stress, and really kind of danger, because I remember driving sometimes and thinking we should not be on the road right now. There's a snowstorm. It's like, downpouring rain and our tires are hydroplaning on the freeway. It's like kind of treacherous to make the drive. And the only thing that probably saved us is the fact that there's 4 of us who carpooled, sometimes 5, and we all crammed in a small little Nissan Sentra to make our way to class. So knowing your online or your program, whether it's all online, in person, or a mixture of both, and how that fits your personal lifestyle. Also, clinical sites and how much travel is involved. Some schools will tell you that all their clinical sites that you could possibly go to are within 45 minutes of the university, which is great, which means you're essentially going to be within an hour driving distance from all of your clinical sites. That may be more ideal, especially if you have family or reasons that you need to be home at the end of the night, versus someone who could maybe be more flexible and stay somewhere for a month for clinical. I know when I was in school, I had to drive over 3 hours away for one of my clinical sites, and I ended up staying in a resident call room for an entire month on a couch. So I didn't have kids. I'm grateful I didn't have kids. That would have been really hard. Obviously, I still would have made it work. But if you know that ahead of time, maybe you can pick differently if you have the option to attend a different school that is different setup. Some schools have you travel out of state pretty routinely. You're going all over the country for various clinical sites, and you may not be home for several months at a time. So again, understanding what this would look like for you and your family and your significant other is really key when you're making your decisions on CRNA schools. Also, some schools bundle the cost of this type of travel into tuition, while other schools do not. Some schools will place you in temporary housing that is, again, included in what they help you do and part of your tuition, while other schools is completely on your own. I know some schools are finding Airbnbs and they pass it on to their classmates as far as, hey, this Airbnb is good. Or I know like where I work, some CRNAs and physicians, they actually have houses around the hospital that they rent out to students who come to our hospital for their rotation because they fly from Arizona and California all the way to good old Ohio. So, a lot of times if you're lucky enough to get one of that situation, you're going to have a decent home, but sometimes it's kind of stressful because you don't know if you're going to have good housing for your rotation. You're trying to piece it all together last minute. And I will say, rely on your classmates for this type of help. They have navigated this path before you. So definitely that is why it's really key to have a contact from a classmate who's at least ahead of you in clinical, if not an entire year ahead of you. So you can kind of figure out what they did to navigate that situation. Other thing too is your support system, meaning how important is it to you and how necessary is it to you to have some type of support where you will be located. I have talked to a lot of students, again, because they rotate from either to Ohio, from Arizona or California. And I have had several students tell me that it's been harder than they ever thought to not have friends and family nearby, that, they had moved across state to go to school, and then they're jumping all over the country to go to clinical sites. And it's been an incredibly hard mental stress on them to not just have close friends. And they also sometimes feel like outsiders because they go to a program, say like Akron, for example, where maybe they're from Nebraska, but they're the only one from Nebraska. And the rest of the Akron cohort is mostly from Akron, or surrounding Ohio cities. And they kind of feel like an outsider because everyone seems to know everybody because they worked in the ICU together, they went to undergrad together, et cetera. And that can make you feel kind of lonely. And while I know that they make friends in class, it's kind of hard to come into a situation where you were kind of the one and only outlier, where the most of the time that program takes, students from around other cities. And not that that makes it impossible, but I think knowing your personality type and kind of what you can blend into and what is okay for you to kind of deal with for the next 3 years is really important to kind of address that ahead of time before you make that decision to apply to those programs. So support system and addressing whether or not you are okay with not having that nearby, and whether that really is significant, especially those with young kids or families. Having support nearby really could make or break your experience and your outcome in school, because you may not be able to get out of clinical in time to pick up your child from school. And in fact, I wouldn't even bet on it. So again, having support nearby to help you out with stuff like that could really, really help your experience. Speaking of kids, if you hear kids, I just realized I was in the basement and I'm recording. I'm like, uh-oh. Hopefully it's not our potty training 2-year-old, but hopefully I'll just keep him out of the picture because he's going commando. So anyhow, all right. So that is that. And then also things like mission statements. Some schools have very unique mission statements and what they're out to achieve, such as, this program, for instance, said that, they have a very strong value of caring for patients regardless of their ability to pay. And so because of that, they tend to put their clinical sites at very underserved population hospital settings. And so you get to really see the rural community and communities that are really underserved with healthcare. And I'll tell you right now, I've rotated through several hospitals that are like this. Those are the sickest of the sickest patients because they have never had good medical coverage, nor do they even know they're a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. And now you're putting them under anesthesia. And so you're like, you are this, and this, you smoke, you've done this drug, you've done this, or maybe you're an alcoholic and you've not seen a doctor, you've supposedly your heart is fine. But it's like, have you ever been worked up? Have you ever they don't have access to even know whether or not they're following through with some of these potential problems. They're uncontrolled diabetes. All kinds of stuff. So you actually get a very good experience handling very, very sick patients in those settings. And it's also incredibly rewarding because, again, it's your job as an anesthesia provider to make sure they get through surgery safely, despite not having the best, care ahead of time or preventative measures that can really help them potentially get out of surgery healthy. Like maybe they never knew to stop smoking, or maybe, things of that nature. Most of these patients tend to be pretty heavy smokers and stuff of that, and that can cause complications, under anesthesia and things of that nature. So it's just a different population that you will see that presents new challenges and difficult challenges for you as an anesthesia provider. And then keep in mind, like I mentioned before, that this is a 3-year commitment. That, again, what can you tolerate in 3 years? So you want to make sure you finish the program. So again, if this is like, okay, I definitely can't tolerate all this travel or being away from my support system or having to find my own clinical sites, I would go absolutely insane. well, then I would sway you from even picking a school altogether and trying to pick something that is more in line with what you can tolerate over the next 3 years. All right, so that sums up that conversation.
Hey, future CRNA, another daily dose of inspiration along your CRNA journey. In today's success story, we're going to share kind of an untraditional experience from one of our students. So the post reads, I'm so excited to post I was accepted into CRNA school. I interviewed at my dream school. The meeting and panel showed me that this was really not the place for me. Although it was close to my home, the culture and I weren't a match. So after a bit of a traumatic interview experience, I was invited to interview at another school. Side note that I applied to 3 schools, waitlisted at 1. The negative feeling was mutual at my top choice. They accepted at the program that became one of her dreams. Anyway, I called and spoke with the director before the interview, and within minutes, I was excited beyond words. There was a warmth and character that resonated with me. I moved forward with the interview. A couple hours after the interview, they offered me a position in the cohort for the spring. Mind you, the application was for spring 2024, not 2023. So what an incredible surprise that I get to start my journey a year earlier. I don't think this would have been possible without CRNA School Prep Academy and my mock interview. Larissa was fantastic for the mock interview and helped me get over an unsettling experience from my former dream school. The podcast, lectures, resources, mock interview, all CSPA had to offer made this possible. Thank you so much. Don't give up. Don't be afraid to be untraditional in your career path. Study and believe in yourself. Things turn out the way they are meant to be. I just love this so much because while this student had an unfortunate experience at what they thought was their dream school, they turned it around. And they also were waitlisted at a school that didn't start till 2024. And when they got asked to interview at the 3rd school, they were so shaken up by their previous experience that they decided to call and talk directly to this program prior to even interviewing. Now, mind you, they had already knew they had a seat at a school, but didn't start till 2024. But after talking with this other program faculty, they knew they had to give themselves a chance to interview. They felt instantly connected to this program faculty. And they were so happy they did because they got in just a few hours after the interview and they get to start CRNA school an entire year sooner. So I wanted to share this with you because I thought this was really inspirational. And it just goes to show that kind of what we have preached before in the show is that this is a two-way street. You are picking your programs and you may have your dream program in mind, but the reality is it may not be the right fit. And you may have to kind of improvise and pivot to a different school. And it may actually turn out to be the best decision for you ultimately is to not get into what you think is your dream school. So go into it with an open mind. I'm rooting for you. Thank you so much for sharing this story. Congratulations. You know who you are, and I'm always cheering you on.
The next one I want to discuss is communicating with your programs. I know I've stressed pretty often that, you really should be reaching out to your schools well before you ever plan to apply to that program, because you should be researching your schools and learning, learning all these things about your schools prior to even picking to apply there. But I think a lot of students are intimidated by reaching out to their programs. They don't really know what to say. They don't want to come across as needy, or maybe not needy, but what's the other word I'm looking for? Just kind of like, too many questions, or maybe that you don't know what you should know kind of thing. And they don't even know who to email. And some schools have a very direct line of communication to what they call the program and admissions counselor, which is kind of a generic, they're not typically a CRNA, but they're very well versed in the admission process and they can definitely guide you. And if you have access to someone like that, I definitely encourage you to still communicate directly with them. Other schools, you would directly communicate with the assistant program director, the program director themselves. And again, this varies depending on school. Some program directors will flat out tell me like, yeah, Jenny, send people my way. I'm happy to look at their transcripts. I'm happy to sit down and have one-on-one conversations with them and advise them. Other schools don't necessarily, they're not set up that way to be able to do that. And so that it's not even an option. Doesn't mean, one school doesn't like you. It just means that school is not set up that way. And so know that you're going to have variations in your experience when it comes to getting direct line of contact with the program faculty themselves. But any contact better than no contact. Okay. But that being said, here's a piece of advice directly from CRNA faculty, is that, if you email program faculty emails to make sure you keep your questions specific. I've also stated this before because I have received a lot of questions myself. And a lot of times these questions are like paragraphs. And I'm like, oh, not only does it take me, 10 minutes to really thoroughly understand out of the two paragraphs, there's probably like 10 questions. And which I get, you have a lot of questions, which is why we're here to help. And don't get me wrong, I actually love questions because that's how I learn what I need to do to help you. However, that being said, from a program faculty point of view, if that's what you're sending to them, they may just put it in their inbox for later because they may not have 15, 20 minutes to respond to you. It's not that they don't care. It's not that they don't want to help you, or they might take that email and forward it to the admissions counselor, and you're going to probably get a very generic answer back versus probably the more detailed answer you're looking for. So the way to combat this is to take that 2-paragraph, 10-question email, break it up into smaller chunks and have them answer it over time, because you'd be surprised. Some questions will answer other questions of yours. That happens all the time, where you might have a question and a question and a question, but if you had the answer for this question, you'd probably be able to figure out the answer for that question. So start with what you need to know first to move forward, and then let the rest of the questions come as you need to, because if you just do it little by little like that, you'll cut out probably half those questions because you're going to be able to answer your own questions, and you're going to be more specific to the point, and they're going to be more likely to respond to you in a more concise manner. So again, keep the questions very specific and detailed. Don't leave it open-ended because they can't answer open-ended questions. It kind of just is like, well, I have to follow up with another question to get what question you really want me to answer. So, again, very specific questions so they can give you a very specific answer versus, what do I do? Well, tell me about yourself. I don't know. I don't know anything about you. So I can't tell you what to do when I don't know anything about your background. So see what I mean? Give them a very specific question. I have a science GPA of a 3.2. I have a C in organic chemistry, but I have an A in this and this. Should I retake organic chemistry? Would that be worth it to do that? And this is the program I want to take that chemistry course. Is that going to be looked highly upon, or do you have another recommendation for me to do so? Thank you so much. End of question. You've just asked them, should I retake this course and should I take it? And these are my options I've looked into retaking them at. Or they can give you a specific school if they recommend a specific school or whatever that may be, versus saying, I don't know how my GPA looks. I think, I think it's right around here. I don't know how to really improve. Can you please advise? It's like, well, I'd have to review your transcripts then. Can you at least maybe give me some background and review your own transcripts for me? Meaning, how does your GPA break down? I mean, these are things that you're able to do on your own to kind of look at your transcripts to kind of figure out. And if you are looking for a GPA calculator, I don't know when this is going to air specifically, but we will have a GPA calculator on our website here, hopefully when it goes live in October-ish time, that you can have access to and calculate your overall and science GPA very quickly and easily. Also, if you're a CSPA student, you have access to our data sheet, our Excel sheet that you can calculate your GPA. Again, it's more of just a numbers formula game where you again take your credits and how many grade points you achieved and make sure you're averaging them in, especially if you have, 300 credits here and 60 credits here and 20 credits here. It can get kind of confusing because obviously the school that you have 300 credits GPA is going to have way more weight than the school you took 20 credits at. And then again, your science GPA, again, how that breaks down is always really important to make sure you're breaking up both your overall GPA and your science GPA. But enough of that. Next piece of advice when you're emailing your CRNA schools is to read the website first. It probably is annoying when someone emails you and you ask them a question that is literally verbatim already spelled out on the website. Now, some CRNA schools have, in my humble opinion, not so very helpful websites. There's like hardly anything there. You're like, I don't know how people even apply to your program because there's barely anything on here. It's like, just email me and contact me. There's no information on anything. You kind of have to like go the snail mail route and email and submit your information, even get any more information on anything else about the program or even apply. While other schools, it's like they give you tons of information to dig through, like FAQs and all the stats in the last 5 years and like all these really great things, which is great. I love when I find program sites like that. Those are my favorite. And I'm sure they're your favorite too. But be cognizant that you're very thoroughly reading through that before you shoot an email to make sure they're not going to be like, well, I'll just refer to my website, because then it kind of makes it look like you didn't do your homework before you just decide to ask a question. And I'll tell you right now, the day that you get into CRNA school and you start clinical, your preceptors will, if you ask a question that they think you should easily be able to find out on your own, you may get the very not so fun answer of, why don't you go look that up? Because coming humbly from a preceptor now myself, I don't mind questions. I never have. It's never been who I am. But I will say when someone does ask a question that should be something they should already have the knowledge base to be where they are in clinical, it kind of makes you feel like, are you doing your homework? Are you doing all the pre-leg work before you come into clinical to research these things? And you're not going to always know everything. And I'm not trying to fear you away from asking questions. I'm always, like I said, I'm always open to discussing regardless of the question, but I will just say there's not everyone will be. You will have preceptors who will get on you for that. And if you take that personally, well, that's unfortunate. You really shouldn't. You should just move on and know that, okay, well, next time I guess I got to do a little more legwork and try to preemptively guess what it is I should know about the case. There are going to be sometimes you're going to run into questions during the case or before the case that you just couldn't anticipate. And so that's to be expected. But you still have resources to fall back on to look that information up. You essentially have one in your pocket at all times, your cell phone. So again, be cognizant before you ask a dose of a question. Do you have a Vargo app or do you have a resource book that you can open up and look at the dose yourself before you just ask, well, how do I dose this? I mean, that's something that you need to take initiative to do and find out. Similarly, schools are expecting to see that initiative when you're emailing them, asking them questions about their program. Have you taken initiative to try to find the information out first yourself from our website? Or are you just asking a question that they're going to hold you accountable for to go and do your own research for? So I hope that made sense. That was probably a lengthy way of explaining what I meant by that, or the way the reason why this matters to CRNA programs. All right. Next is, the whole question about, tell me about yourself. People have always dreaded this question because it's ugh, who likes to talk about themselves, right? Not many people do, but you still have to be able to express to a group of strangers who you are. And they genuinely do care. They genuinely want to see and know who you are because they want to see if you'd be a good fit for their program and their cohort. So here's some advice about that question. They want to know your journey. They want to know why CRNA and essentially what makes you stand out. Be aware. One of the big pieces of advice is to be aware how long your answer is and making sure that it's succinct to the point. Because, for example, they may have a 15-minute window to interview you, and maybe they break that up over 5-minute interviews each. So if you give, a 1 to 2 minute answer or potentially longer, you could be taking up the majority of that time they have to even ask you any questions, do any assessments. And so you could be really chewing into valuable time to have them get to know you better. So making sure that you tell, enough for them to get an understanding of, why you're pursuing this career path and kind of what your background is. But also remember too, they already have your resume. You don't need to regurgitate your resume. It's already in front of them. So this is really something that is more unique to you. And it could be something that you didn't mention in your personal statement. Maybe you wanted to elaborate on it a little bit more in a more personalized way via communication versus on paper. But you make sure that it's relative. And again, that the content is going to matter for the short duration of time that you have to be very succinct and to the point. So again, you want to make sure that you are also reading between the lines. If you see someone kind of starting to zone out a little bit or lose eye contact with you or seem less engaged, you have to be able to read the room and know when it's okay to just stop. I think sometimes when you get nervous, it's easy to just want to keep talking because you feel like, oh, they're waiting for me to say more. Like that silence is so deadly. They must want more from me. And so you just keep talking and talking and talking. Definitely guilty of that. But that's not always the best, especially during a very limited interview opportunity. And you can sometimes tell when people are totally checked out and zoned out. So try to just read the room and gather the eye contact, whether they're smiling, whether they're sitting forward and engaged. And that means they're engaged. If you could tell they're maybe taking a seat back now, and maybe they're just kind of nodding their head, maybe it means it's time to wrap things up. So just try to gauge the room, the people that you're talking to as you're telling the story. And they also want to, this was pointed out too, that when they're assessing, why CRNA, why this program, and things of that nature, they're picking, remember, they're not just picking you, they're picking an entire cohort of students. And so they're actually really assessing who's going to work well together. So, because they're going to have a lot of qualified applicants. They turn away a lot of qualified applicants every single time, but individually they pick what they think is best for their program in their cohort. So let's just say you have 50, or let's just say you have 30 people who are like, okay, these are like the top notch applicants that I'd let them all in if I could, but I can only pick 15. Well, then out of those 15, who are they? What are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? How would they all fit together in a big puzzle piece? And maybe even though this applicant is more than qualified and did great, maybe I fear their personality wouldn't fit in with the other 10 that we are 100% set on. And so out of the 5 seats that are left, I'm going to pick this other person because they're equally very qualified, but they have a personality type and a why that is very unique and that I think will fit in nicely with the cohort. So that may seem kind of like, really, that's how, and I'm telling you, that's kind of what they do. They want to pick, and I think what's unfortunate about that system and just the way it is yes, there's room for error. And when they only have 15 minutes to get to know you, do they know everything? No, they sure don't. And so that's why I'm saying your answers need to be succinct and to the point, because you could be taking away valuable time for them to truly get to know you better so they can make a more informed decision when they're picking their cohort. So that is why when you practice these answers and when you're like, I'm not saying you want to go and sound rehearsed, but you need to practice and understand why you're giving a certain answer to a specific question. It doesn't have to be the exact question, but if you have an idea of what you want to say, it allows you to try to like record yourself, listen to the way it sounds, ask someone to listen to you who, you trust at work that maybe isn't someone that knows you very well, and get their feedback. And ask them if it made sense, because sometimes in your mind it makes sense because you can fill in all the pieces because you know your journey very well. But to a complete stranger, it may sound really like bounced around and very disorganized and like like they may be like, okay. So that's why it's really important to get someone who is kind of out of touch with who you are to really assess how you communicate your journey and your story to them. All right, so that is that question. This next one I think is important because I guess I'll mention this one. I haven't started. I kind of laugh when I say it because this has kind of been on some CRNA forums as of late. That has been a pet peeve of certain program people. So I'm like, well, I'll just address it here because I don't personally think I've ever coached anyone to say this. But who knows? I mean, who knows, right? I mean, the big scheme of things, I don't think that I just want to address it now and get on the air that, this is a pet peeve of some programs, not all, but some, is when an interviewee asks them, what can you do to ensure my success? Trigger alert, trigger alert. Again, not that this is inherently a bad question, but I think it comes across the wrong way when taken out of context. And here's what I mean by that. Only you are responsible for your success. And ultimately that's about taking ownership, right? Taking ownership for your actions, what you do. And that's where I think the offensiveness nature of that question can come across in the wrong tone or manner. Which is why I think it was brought to the attention in all these forums and stuff. But I do think, saying, what can you do to support me if I end up needing support is not a bad question, but really to ensure your success, that's on you. And so that's where I think it went wrong. So support and support. Okay. Success. That's pretty heavy, right? Success is in your own hands. You have to use support when you need it to get to be successful, right? That's taking ownership for, okay, I'm not doing okay, whether that's mentally, academically, whatever it is, I need more support. And knowing how your school can support you is really key, but it's not their job to make sure you're successful. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It is, they provide you all the tools that you need to be successful, right? But it's up to you to use the tools. Essentially, that's what I'm saying is it's up to you to use it. The opportunities there, you have to know how to help yourself at the end of the day. What do I need to be successful? What do I need to ask for because I'm struggling? I need to let them know I'm struggling, not after the problem happens, but before the problem. I've always said this over and over again. Once you have a problem and a bad outcome occurs, there's very little you can't change the outcome once the outcome occurs. Similar in anesthesia. You can't change a bad outcome. you can preemptively say, what can I do to prevent a potential bad outcome? What are some steps I can do that for someone who's a severe asthmatic who had a recent upper respiratory infection? Can I give some albuterol? Yeah, why not? It's not going to hurt anything. Could save you a bronchospasm. Why not? So that's similarly when you're in school, you could say, okay, how can I be proactive in my own education and support to know what I need and to make sure I'm speaking up for those things and advocating for myself? Okay, that was a mouthful. But yeah, let's put that in the clear. Do not ask a program how do they ensure your own success, because they're going to want to see you take ownership for that. All right. Now asking them how they support their students, that's in my opinion completely normal and to be expected. Some schools have student success centers. Some colleges offer free counseling, and I think that's important for you to know about. And knowing that you are human and that you will need support along the way, right? So anyhow, that's enough of that one. But let's get into does it matter, what type of ICU experience you have for CRNA school? That was a question that was asked. And I loved the answers that were given between the 4 faculty for this, because it really hit home what I've always preached, which it doesn't matter as long as the acuity is really high. So this is not going to be all programs. And that's not a blanket statement. All programs won't feel this way. Some may truly have a preference. However, what I will say is that even if they don't like the ICU you came from, if you got a solid experience and you know your stuff, they're gonna look past that, because they care more about, what was the quality of your ICU experience, not just because you worked in neuro versus a CV ICU. You can have someone who doesn't really know what's going on in the CV ICU and someone who's a rock star in neuro ICU and really has a really well managed concept of critical care in the neuro and not CV ICU. It doesn't correlate with just because you're here, you're going to be better. It's more about how you use your time while you're on that specific unit that can really make or break your experience and your ability to show that the kind of quality experience you were able to achieve while working there. All right. So no preference in ICU. Pretty much all 4 of them agreed unanimously that it didn't matter, except that it mattered that it was high acuity. And then, again, they don't care about the type of ICU. They, actually enjoy variation in ICU is what one said, because it adds value to their cohort. So NICU, PICU, neuro ICU, MICU, CV ICU, it's kind of nice to have a blend of people in your cohort so they can all kind of do their own contributions with their strengths of their knowledge base, because you're going to be working really closely with this cohort. So they actually saw that as a value point to not just have all CV ICU nurses in their cohort. So again, if you're like worried about your experience, this hopefully is reassuring that you don't have to have, CV ICU experience to be selected for CRNA school. I sure didn't. A good chunk of my cohort didn't. There's been plenty of NICU, PICU nurses who get in. You just have to make sure your school takes those experiences. If they say yes to NICU, PICU, well, then they say yes to that. If they say on an individual basis, that means it's not preferred. I wish I just would say that. I wish I'd say it's not preferred, but we will consider you. That's essentially what an individual basis means. So just know what the expectations are prior to applying. And then in my opinion, you'd feel very confident going forward, depending on what you know about that. So obviously the NBCRNA sets the standards for what ICU, but again, it's not necessarily the ICU they come from that sets their success. It's kind of how they utilize their time while they're in the ICU. So again, the type is less important than what you did on the unit. So were you involved in any quality improvement and leadership roles? Were you taking the sickest of the sickest patients? Were you getting advanced training in different life support modalities like CRRT or ECMO or things of that nature? So again, they look for what did you do specifically while you were on that unit, and how deep did you go? Which is why I've always unencouraged people to jump around. I think they're like, oh, I'll go here and then I'll go here and I'll have 3 different ICUs in my background. I'll look great. The problem is when you're new in an ICU, you tend to not take the sickest of the sickest patients. You also tend not to do advanced life support things like ECMO right away. It tends to take like 6 to 8 months to get trained up to that. So every 6 to 8 months, if you're jumping around, you're probably not going to ever take care of the sickest of the sickest patients in that particular ICU. And you're going to start all over again, fresh, not have any leadership roles or anything like that. Because again, typically a brand new nurse, even if they came from the MICU to the CV ICU, is not going to be charged in the CV ICU for quite some time. So it can really set you kind of back a little bit when it comes to leadership roles and getting on committees and really getting the sickest of the sickest patients when you're jumping around all the time. Similarly, that's why they worry about travel nursing, is because you tend to not get those opportunities for leadership and taking the sickest of the sickest patients. Now, that being said, with travel nursing, if you have a really strong ICU background prior to traveling, you typically don't have problems getting those high acuity assignments. But if you graduate within 6 months, you're off to the travel land, and you've never did ECMO before or CRT before, and you just had a basic orientation and then you just traveled, you're going to probably stick with probably pretty basic assignments as a traveler as well, because you don't have any advanced training. And usually these hospitals who are hiring locums, or not locums, they call them locums when you're CRNAs, travel nurses, are not usually willing to invest in someone who's only going to spend maybe 12 weeks there. So they don't give them any extra training. So just keep all that in mind when you're making decisions around your career and how you are going to go about getting your ICU experience. All right, as I can already tell, this is getting kind of lengthy. So this may be a very good place to end part one. Coming up in part two, we're going to discuss things like pass, fail applicants, precepting as a leadership role, how to combat anxiety and imposter syndrome or test anxiety, and things of that nature. So a lot of good things to come up in the next part two episode. I hope you guys found a lot of value in this. And again, this is advice that was given directly from CRNA faculty and a variety of faculty. So again, I hope you guys take this to heart and don't apply it as blanket statements to all, but take it as a guide to help you navigate this journey. So I'm wishing you guys the best. I will see you for part two. Until then, take care and best of luck, and I'll see you guys soon. All right, bye-bye. Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.